Well, good morning, everybody. Thank you very much for joining us this morning, this Saturday morning, for our virtual Wales Cooperative Conference. We're delighted to see you all here and our guests who are going to be contributing today as well. We've had a very big application for registration for this conference, and we know we're going to have more people joining us as the morning goes on. So you're all very welcome indeed. And we're going to get underway straight away. Just after I say a couple of basic housekeeping rules. I'm sure everybody now is getting used to how these meetings online work and how these conferences online work, but just a couple of technical things. First of all, before we go to our keynote speaker, who is, as you know, our First Minister, Mark Drakeford, and I'm delighted to have Mark with us today. We need to let you know that, first of all, this Zoom call is being recorded. Now, many of our members can't access it live. So what we're going to do is make it available to view subsequently. So just so you're aware of that, we're trying to be as open with these conferences and meetings as we can and make use of the technology. So it'll be on the Co-op Party's YouTube channel. So on that basis, if you don't want your image to be seen, just remove yourself from the video, which will be on your controls, and go to audio only. Simple as that. So if you don't want your image to be seen, take yourself off the video and go to audio only. Now, secondly, to make the content of this call clearer for everybody, so everybody can hear as crisp as possible, only those people speaking will have their sound enabled. Now, we've had some pre-submitted questions, which is brilliant, and there's some really good questions there. If one of these is yours, that you've pre-submitted a question, and it is selected to the First Minister or to the panelists afterwards, then I'll unmute you and we'll go to you to ask it directly. So I won't read it out, we'll come to you to ask you. Okay, and we will unmute you. Now, if you haven't pre-submitted a question today, don't worry. You can actually write it in the chat function, which is on your toolbar, and one of our staff team will send a question to me, or you can click on the icon labeled participants at the bottom center of your screen or your PC. Click the button labeled raise hand. And when your digital hand is raised, some of you will be familiar with this, it's a little icon that comes up with a raised hand electronically. Then I'll come to you then, if we've got time, obviously, to ask a question. And I'll introduce you and you'll be unmuted. So, with all of that, try and keep your questions and your contributions very short, because we want to fit in as many as possible. And with that preamble and some housekeeping, I'm delighted now to introduce our First Minister, Mark Drakeford. Really grateful that he's found the time to be with us today to deliver a keynote at this virtual conference. And after his speech, we'll move on to a Q&A session, a brief Q&A session with Mark as well. Mark, delighted to have you with us. We know you've had your hands full, and we're so thankful that you've given the opportunity here to say a few words to us. Over to you.
Well, Hugh, bore da, diolch yn fawr iawn I chi. Thank you so much to you, Hugh, and to Karen and the team for organising today's event. It's an extraordinary event, and it's an extraordinary event in extraordinary times. I'm going to, as you'd expect, focus on the coronavirus crisis, because for many weeks now it has been all-consuming as far as the Welsh Government is concerned. And cooperative party members have been, as you all know, at the very heart of the government's response, whether that is Lee Waters in everything that he does alongside Ken Skates in trying to shape our economy and to find a way out of what is an economic as well as a health crisis. Rebecca Evans, who has had to undertake the most extraordinary job in dealing with a huge inflow of funds to Wales, but a huge outflow of funds to all those organisations companies, businesses, public services and so on, who are relying on the help that we are able to offer them to get them through the crisis. And then, of course, Vaughan Gethin as the Health Minister, absolutely in the thick of the day-to-day, the never-ending demands that have been placed on us, dealing with new difficulties, new challenges, new possibilities every single day. And, you know, Vaughan has made the most enormous contribution over recent weeks. Now, the crisis that we are in is by no means over. So I want to, you know, be clear about that right at the beginning. But I also wanted to say something to you about where we think we are in relation to the progress of the disease. And the slightly more optimistic news for you there is that we probably are in a better position than we anticipated even a few short weeks ago. There is less coronavirus circulating in the community today than since the lockdown began. The number of deaths that we very sadly have to report every day has been in single figures for every day of the past week other than one. The number of people in critical care beds in our hospitals is the lowest since the 25th of March. The R number, which is, when we publish it formally, it is a composite of 6 different research groups who all have slightly different models and get their data in different ways. Yesterday, the Institute for Mathematical Modelling, which is one of the 6 organisations, published their latest results. It said that the R figure in Wales has fallen to 0.7%. And may be falling faster in Wales than any other part of the United Kingdom. All of that means that as we approach next Friday, which is when we will announce the results of this 3-week cycle of review of the regulations, we have some additional headroom to make some further changes to return some freedoms to people here in Wales. And with my cabinet colleagues and with members of the Labour group in the Assembly, we are working really hard to make sure that we identify the right combination of actions to take at this point and to look ahead to see what might be possible in the future. All of this, as you can imagine, has been hugely demanding. Demanding of individual members of the government, demanding of those organisations that support us. And we have had the most tremendous support. The work done by people who work for the NHS and social care in Wales is beyond words to describe to you. But the contribution of our local authorities has been absolutely enormous as well, as have third sector and other bodies that we have had to rely on. It has been the most amazing, cooperative, collective effort. And the fact that we are in the position I described a moment ago today is because of the efforts of all those players, but particularly the efforts of Welsh citizens. We simply wouldn't have the headroom we think we have today if it were not for that fantastic sense of social solidarity that we have seen in communities up and down Wales, with each individual making their own contribution, and then those contributions adding up to the position we find ourselves in now. And I just wanted to give one brief example of the way I think you can see that in practice. It's a tentative example. I don't want to put too much weight on it because the evidence is very recent and can change. But we reported at the end of last week the latest figures from our Test, Trace, Protect system, the system we use to identify whether there are local outbreaks of coronavirus still occurring in Wales. And we do that, as you know, by contacting every person who has had a positive test result for coronavirus, asking them to give us the names and contact details of people they've been in contact with, and then asking those people to isolate themselves so that they don't pose a risk to others. Across our border, the decision was taken to put that system in the hands of a private profit-making company, and for people to be recruited remotely who would contact people at a distance. Here, we have decided not to do that. Our contact tracing system is run by people who are employed by public services, primarily local government and the health service. And they are people who are based locally and who, when they pick up the phone to phone somebody, knows the local geography, understands the way in which people's lives are led in the very many different parts of Wales. The English figures reported yesterday said that they are managing to contact about 2/3 of the people who have been tested positive. But there's a significant number of people who are not willing to share their contacts with a contact tracing system, and that where those contacts are shared, they manage to contact about 85% of them. Here in Wales, we have the most marginal number of people who are not prepared to share their contacts, and we managed to contact 95% of the contacts that have been given to us. And why is that contrast emerging? Well, I think it's simple enough, really. Trust is the oil that runs this system. Nobody has to give you this information. They give you the information because they trust the system that it is being given into. And I think there is a difference for people in Wales who think they are being asked to share information with a public service that they know and they value, rather than a private company that is making profit out of the enterprise, and that they are speaking to people who they can recognise as being fellow members of their own local community. And I think that is no surprise to us in Wales, because that way of doing things, that public service-driven way of doing things, that way that recognises that we make a contribution not because it matters to us, but because it makes a difference to others, has long been at the heart of the way that Welsh political life is organised. It's absolutely at the heart of the way that the Labour and Co-operative parties operate, and operate through the Welsh government. Now, the question I want to focus on in the rest of what I have to say is about looking to the future. Coronavirus has been a most awful experience. You know, every day we have to announce the details of people who have died and who go on dying. And the number of those people is now well over 2,200 and continues to rise. So nothing what I'm about to say is at all to set aside that huge amount of human harm and distress. But from the experience, there have to be some things that we can take positively from it. There's a list of things that I could mention to you that we are determined to go on achieving during the rest of this Assembly term: creating a community bank, focusing on the foundational economy, creating more cooperative housing, building on the community wealth building work of the Wales Co-op Centre here. But I'm going to focus on just two dimensions, and there could have been many more, to think about the lessons we are learning from the experience and what that might mean for the future. And the first is our social care service. So you will all remember, or some of you will remember, that back in the 1980s, Mrs. Thatcher handed over the social care service from local authorities who had predominantly run it up until then, and put it into the marketplace. The result is that by today, social care in Wales, as in the rest of the United Kingdom, is dominated by private providers of care. And many of them do a fantastic job. So nothing about this is about attacking those people who are dedicated, go far beyond what the job description would suggest to look after the people in their care. But I've long believed that to call social care in Wales a private sector activity, despite the fact that it is dominated by private sector providers, is simply not to reflect the truth. It is in effect a para-public activity in which public money provides the underpinning of that whole activity. And during the coronavirus crisis, that has become even more apparent. The sector in Wales has been able to do the job it has because it has been underpinned by arrangements for food that have been provided through the public sector, by our ability to direct experienced nurses coming back into the system to go and work in the sector, by the provision of PPE, which in Wales we have done free of charge for the sector, whereas in England they are charged for every item that they use, and by providing £40 million in additional funding so far to allow the sector to continue to operate. And as we move ahead beyond the crisis, we have to take that opportunity to rebalance the social care market, to make it clear that this public investment, this huge public investment, has to result in a greater return for the money that the public is putting into it. And that, I think, will be one of the big challenges that we will face, alongside everything that we have done in recent years to investigate a new model for paying for care. That's not going to be easy in a period where a lot of people are going to be out of work as a result of coronavirus. But we work very hard on developing that new model, and we're not going to be willing to throw that away either. Secondly, and briefly, to talk about transport. So we have, for a very long time, provided an enormous amount of public subsidy to both train and bus services in Wales. I'm going to focus on bus services because far more people use them than use the trains, important as trains are. At the moment, buses are running about 30% of a normal service. And every time somebody gets on a bus, the public purse is subsidising that journey to a tune of £30. Every single journey costing £30. So we have to think about how we get a return on that investment. The sector, again, is dominated by private providers. We have very little ability, again, because of Thatcher reforms in deregulating the bus industry, to make that public money shape a bus service that works in the public interest. We are determined to seize the opportunity that coronavirus presents to make that public interest felt far more powerfully in the way that bus services are organised and run in the future. And the Cabinet will be discussing a paper on Monday of this week, which has some quite radical proposals, which will certainly not go unopposed, I can tell you, to make sure that we do just that. Finally, Hugh, to say that in all of this, we will be looking very carefully and drawing on the Owning the Future document that the Co-op Party has published very recently. I said on the floor of the Assembly last week that the great thing about the document is that it offers a recipe of practical actions. It is not just another analysis of the challenges that we face. It provides an analysis, and then it provides a set of practical ideas that we can put to work as we rebuild our society, rebuild our economy, and do it in the way that we would want to see. 68% of the people surveyed by the Co-op Party were clear they did not want to go back to the way things were before the crisis started. But just to end by saying, none of us will be surprised to learn that it will be a struggle. It will never fall into our laps. Progressive progress, progressive action has never been won without a struggle. And the UK government will, I think, revert to type very quickly once the crisis is over. Back to its neoliberal dogmas, back to loading the consequences of the crisis onto the shoulders of those least able to bear that burden. Here in Wales, we will have to fight to get the things that we want. We will have to fight to win another election. We will have to fight to make sure that the things that matter to people in Wales are the things that we take out of the experience that we have lived through so intensely together. Diolch yn fawr. Thank you all very much.
Mark, thank you very much for that indeed. I think that was, it's fair to say that was both thoughtful and insightful, but also quite impassioned as well in terms of the challenges that we have ahead. But I thank you as well for your recognition of the incredible work that's been carried out by our public services and frontline workers at these times, but also our communities and our voluntary sector, the huge collective effort of solidarity. And it would be remiss of me not to mention as well, I think our thanks as well for the work that's going on from your officials and ministers in these times which are unprecedented in our generation. Can I also just draw attention, the First Minister mentioned there the report that has come out from the Co-operative Party on owning the future. I'd recommend to all fellow cooperators on this call, they have a look at that. But before they do that, have a look at Mark's blog, which he wrote for us this week in advance of this conference call today. It touches on some of the points he just mentioned. Now, Mark, if you're content there, what we're going to do is move on to some questions, and we're going to ask our people who are putting some questions to keep them short and concise as possible, so that Mark, we can get as many answers from you as possible in the time we have. Now we're going to go in groups of 3 if that's okay. So I'm just putting Sarah Birch will be the first, but if I can just put on warning Michael Fogg and also Tracey Alexander, who's asked a list of questions. But Tracey, I wonder, you can pick whatever you want, but it'd be interesting the focus that you have there on the green economy as well when you come to your question. So if we can go to Sarah Birch first, then to Michael Fogg, and then Tracey Alexander. And I'm going to leave this in the hands of the people who are organising this behind the scenes.
Thank you, First Minister, from Abergavenny, where I have to say, I think all the ladies of Abergavenny love you and think you're much better than Boris. My question was, we have a strong mutual finance sector in Wales, both the credit union movement and the mutual building societies, with already established businesses in most communities. How can they best support the resilience of the local economies? And where do you see the gaps and opportunities in ensuring that we don't have a post-COVID credit crunch in Wales?
And then hopefully we can move to Michael Fogg. Bear with us. If we can't get to Michael, then I will. Okay, I'm not. What I'll do is I'll read Michael's question then. Michael, I hope you'll excuse me for doing this. So, Michael, he's asking you, First Minister, what role do you think that community-based crowdfunding will play in the Welsh economy going forward? And then if we can go to Tracey Alexander, if she is online.
Do you want me to come in now? Yes.
Is that Tracey?
Yes.
Yes, please.
Okay, fine. Will, what does the Welsh Government, what plans do Welsh Government have for building a green economy? I would suggest that economies become localised and that we place all our policies around natural green supported by ecotech policies. It's the basis of everything, basically. So what plans do Welsh Government have for that in light of climate change and also building the economy in the future? It strikes me that the current situation with Corona calls for big changes, and this seems the perfect opportunity, although sadly, to build a green future.
Thank you very much. First Minister, over to you.
Hugh, thank you. Look, I'll try and answer questions briefly today because I can see on the screen just how many questions are coming in. So I'll try and just be focused in my answer to give more people a chance. So, very keen indeed to recognise what was said from Abergavenny about the existing nature of mutual credit in Wales, the credit union movement, very important to us in the Welsh Government, but also, as you heard, the existing mutual building societies, Mynmwlshire Building Society. So what can we do to reinforce that? Well, just two quick points there. The community bank that we are committed to developing in Wales will fill a gap because we still need, I believe, a high street presence where people can walk in and conduct their financial affairs. There are some very striking figures that tell us that when a high street bank branch closes, lending to SMEs, small and micro businesses in the area, falls by 90% in the 12 months following the closure. And our plans for a community bank are there to help with that. At the very other end of the spectrum, we have the Development Bank for Wales. And haven't we been glad to have had the Development Bank during this crisis? Because we have a Wales-wide instrument there that we have been able to use to lend money at very, very modest rates of interest to those businesses who were desperate for help to get through the first phase of the crisis. And, we're very proud of the Development Bank for Wales. It is doing a great job in many ways, and there's more that we can get out of it in the future. On Michael's point about community crowdfunding, well, for what it's worth, my own view is that its contribution will be modest. Wales is not a rich country. Wales is not a place where we have large numbers of people with lots of cash that they're able to draw on. So community crowdfunding will have a place, but I think it will be modest. I don't think we should rely on it for core, collective purposes. And finally, to Tracey's question, Tracey is surely absolutely right to point to the fact that the coronavirus crisis has highlighted the need for localised economies. We've had a few weeks of real struggle on PPE over the 3 months. Thankfully, never running out, but there were some weekends where we were closer than we would want to have been to the margins. And that's because we have relied for PPE on long supply chains across global networks, which broke down very fast under the weight of the crisis. And one of the ways that we have got through it all, and Lee, who I think is in the conference today, has been leading this for us, is to repurpose local businesses, and they've been fantastic at it, to provide PPE in Wales for Welsh purposes. And we are working hard to make sure that when the crisis comes to an end, we don't lose that indigenous supply. And that is part of a green response because it comes with much shorter supply chains, much shorter distances travelled and so on. The bigger picture is, I think, the one that we have been advocating in the Welsh Government for a long time now. Wales's future relies on our great stroke of luck in being where we are in relation to the green economy, the renewable energy economy, wind, waves, water, all the things you need we have in Wales. and we have an opportunity to develop those industries in a way that will serve us locally, but be able to provide jobs that will be there, not in the short run, but for the longer run too.
Mark, thank you very much for that. Now, I'm conscious of your time as well, because you do have other things to get to, but do you have time for another batch of 3, or do you have to get away?
No, I'm okay for 3 more. You've got a timetable to stick to for the conference as well, but I'm certainly willing to do 3 more.
Okay, well, thank you to our first batch of questions. We've got a lot of questions coming in. We're going to go to Darren Rees, who submitted a couple of questions. So Darren, can you stick to one short one, please? David Smith, and then to Mary Winbury, who's flagged something up on the future of social care and value and remuneration and so on, beyond the £500 payment and so on. So I'll go to those. By the way, a welcome as well, just so you're all aware, to one group of people I haven't mentioned. We do have some colleagues from the media here as well online. So you're very welcome, and I hope you find this interesting as well. So Darren Rees, we're coming over to you.
Thank you, Hugh. First Minister, should Welsh Government's investment in companies such as Aston Martin be reviewed following COVID and introduce a new investment strategy which focuses on production of products that the world requires and not desires? An example of this would be wind turbine and wind and tide turbine development.
Thank you, Darren. And on to David Smith.
Thank you. Borodar, it's over 12 years ago from the Wales Court Board's Regional Board, we've been championing the notion of social care cooperatives, which are multi-stakeholder. And we recognise the important contribution that Mark made in 2016 in supporting a care to cooperate unit at the Wales Co-op Centre. Looking to the future, Mark, my question is this: do you actually agree that Wales needs to invest in local authority commissioning so that it has capacity, capability, and direction to nurture grassroots self-help organisations through support for citizens-led organisations? Thank you.
Thank you very much, David. And finally, on this 3, we're going to bring in Mary Winbury. And Mary, you can't try and answer David's question, okay?
Good morning, everybody. So Hugh referenced that I'd put a question in the margins about social care, but I'd also submitted a different one in advance. So I'm not sure which one you want me to ask.
Either would be fine, Mary.
Okay.
You go ahead.
The question I'd submitted in advance was that when I stood in Wrexham in the general election last December as a Labour and Co-op candidate, I got a lot of questions about the co-op and co-op politics. And it's notable that we've never had a co-op MP, Labour and Co-op MP in North Wales. We have one member of the Senedd at the moment in sort of middle of North Wales, and Jones. And what I got was a really positive response to co-op politics, but a sort of lack of knowledge. And I just wondered what the First Minister thought we could do more to promote co-op politics in North Wales in particular.
What a great one to end on. Mark, over to you, please.
Thank you very much. Well, Darren, I absolutely understand the thrust of the question. I think we are going to be in a position quite soon and for the rest of this year where jobs are going to be in very, very short supply in Wales, jobs of any sort. The Bank of England is predicting that we will have 9% unemployment by December of this year. And in the short run, at least, I don't think the Welsh Government will be in a position to pick and choose between jobs that are available when there will be so many families in Wales looking very hard for employment. That does not mean, of course, that we do not want to go on skewing our investment in favour of the sorts of developments that Darren mentioned. So we are supporting in Pembrokeshire, and some of you will have seen that we gave the go-ahead this week to the Pembroke Marine project, which is part of the Swansea City deal and is a very exciting and important part of our investment in renewable energy in South West Wales. One of the really exciting things we are investing in there is what's called floating wind. But the floating wind development that we are supporting is not just wind turbines floating on the sea out beyond the shoreline, but they are floating winds which underneath the platform have a turbine that is also able to generate energy from the movement of the waves. So it is combining tidal and wind energy on a single platform. It's probably unique and offers us a real opportunity to do something in Wales that would then be of interest right around the world. Thank David for his question. Very good to see David on the screen there. You know, David and I were both involved in visits from Canada and from Italy, where social care is provided through cooperatives on a much bigger scale, and where multi-stakeholder cooperatives, as David said, are the model that they use, for example, in Quebec. And it was great to be able to hear directly from people with that experience. In our social care legislation, we require our local authorities to produce every year local market reports. And the purpose of the local market report, one of them, is to look for new opportunities to rebalance the market. We need to have a greater plurality of providers in the social care market, including local authorities themselves in some very specialist forms of care, including greater numbers of not-for-profit cooperative providers alongside the sector that we currently have, and supporting the best of that sector in the very important work that they do, and where local authorities are able to support initiatives to create new bodies, new possibilities for rebalancing the market. That's a very important contribution they could make. And then finally to Mary, and good Mary to see you and Tal as well this morning. My, albeit limited, sort of view of how the Co-operative Party and the Labour Party have worked together in Wales is that it very often is a matter of local traditions. Here in Cardiff, Cardiff South and Penarth has always, for many, many years, been represented by a Labour and Co-op member, and Cardiff West, my own constituency, has not had the same tradition. So we probably just need to build up the number of candidates we have, who we can then get elected, who carry the Labour and Cooperative banner, because by doing that we will have different opportunities for conversations with members of the public about the contribution that cooperative ideas, cooperative activity and cooperative politics as a way of taking forward those ideas and possibilities. We'll have more opportunities to have those conversations of the sort that you had in Wrexham, and you know, it's really interesting to hear you say that in what was a tough election, as we know, and nowhere tougher really than in Wrexham, that there was a receptivity on the part of the public to hearing about those ideas, and we should do more to build on that, as I say, by selecting candidates at all the levels that we have in the party, and build up our local capacity to have those debates and dialogues and carry that message.
Mark, thank you very much indeed, and thank you for as well spending so much time with us on the Q&A there. I know you've got other things to get on with, but before you go, can I just say, and I think it'll be, hopefully it'll capture the sentiment of all from us here, is wishing you the very best in all that you and your cabinet members and your officials are doing, but also the leadership that you're showing as well in terms of us in Wales as citizens of Wales as well. So please keep on going, working your way through it. Thank you as well for your engagement with the Co-operative Party openly and frankly and constructively in Wales. It's great to have a government that talks to us about campaigning and policy and so on, and also for your engagement with the Senedd group, which, as you know now, is the biggest it's ever been in terms of Co-operative Party membership as well. So we look forward to continuing that relationship with you and your engagement very much.
Pleasure. Thank you very much indeed for today. Diolch yn fawr.
Okay, now this isn't the end, you'll be pleased to know, either of contributions from some speakers, but also in terms of your opportunity to ask questions as well. And we have 4 excellent panelists now to join us. We have our Deputy Minister for Economy and Transport, Lee Waters. We have Christina Rees, Member of Parliament for Neath. We have a chap called Alun Michael, who happens to be our Police and Crime Commissioner as well. And we also have the excellent Councillor Liz Burnett, all fellow cooperators and Co-operative Party members. And between them, covering a very wide range of areas of public policy and of governance in Wales as well. So, I think if we kick off in order with some very short contributions from our panelists, and then we're going to move to Q&A. Now, some of you who've asked questions didn't manage to get them to Mark. Don't worry, because some of them will be applicable to our panelists as well. But do remember, if you want to submit more questions, you can pop them in the little box there alongside, and we'll try and pick them up. So if we can do it in the order that I mentioned, so we'll go Lee, Christina, Alun, and Liz. So if we go over to you, first of all, Lee, for your short contribution.
Diolch yn fawr, Hugh, a bore da pawb, pleser I bod yma. And as you mentioned, we've got a strong group of Labour and Co-op AMs, and as well as yourself here on the call, we've got Anne Jones, Jenny Rathbone, and Alan Davis. So lovely to see everybody. I only ever see people via bloody Zoom these days, but you haven't changed that much. So I just thought I'd briefly concentrate on what we're doing around resilience, because we are being hit by a tsunami of grimness at the moment. And as Mark pointed out, the economic impacts of COVID are only just beginning to be felt. We are anticipating a wave of redundancies over the next couple of months. And I think, our task is not just to indulge in a counsel of despair, but it's to set out hope and how we can provide a path out of this, and a path out of this that gets us into a better place than we were when we went into it. So the work I've been focusing on is around what we call the foundational economy. Terrible name, nobody knows what the hell it means. Other people call it community wealth building, and it's a movement that is growing around the world in cities and in regions, and we are the first country in the world to adopt this as a national platform. And we're doing a number of practical things. So I'll put up in a second on the chat a link for some of the projects that we are supporting. So there are 3 strands to our work on the foundational economy. The first is an experimental strand. And this is explicitly saying, government, the days of governments of having 5-year plans are gone. As we're just witnessing, we are subject to incredibly unstable forces, and we need to be far more agile in the way that we respond to things. So try things, be willing to fail, learn from that experience, adapt, and move on and scale up success. So what we've done is launch a series of 52 trials in the foundational economy, and I've just put the link with a list of some of those, but just to give you a flavour of how the cooperative and social enterprise ethos is deeply embedded in many of those. So we are working with the people behind the Sardinian model of an alternative currency to trial one in Wales, so we can try and capture the wealth in the economy and not allow that wealth to leak out. A key cooperative principle. In Carmarthenshire, we're looking at local food and how we can get local food on local plates in the health service and in schools, and I'm very keen to try and rapidly scale that up if we possibly can. And in social care, we've got a range of projects with a cooperative ethos. In Pembrokeshire, establishing a not-for-profit agency for supplying relief care workers. In East Port Talbot, with the Community Voluntary Service, a social enterprise model for domiciliary care and low-level home services, a project to develop a cooperative model for administrative service, back office services for social care providers, and in Swansea with the creation of micro co-ops to purchase and provide care in rural areas in the Gower and other parts of Swansea. So this is just a flavour of some of the projects we're trialling. And the idea is we do this rapidly, and COVID has knocked us sideways in terms of slowing things down a bit. But what I'm really keen on is that this doesn't become more pilot projects for the sake of pilot projects. These come short, sharp interventions that we can learn from quickly. So strand 1 is the experimental. Strand 2 then is the scaling, and working with the Centre for Local Economic Strategies, a Manchester-based think and do tank who've done the work in Preston and Islington and the Wirral and elsewhere of community wealth building. And there we're doing a concentrated piece of work with local authorities and public service boards created under the Future Generations Act to analyse procurement spend. We know we spend £6 billion a year in Wales of public funds on goods and services, and how can we keep more of that in the region, in the area? So particularly, and Mark mentioned the work on PPE. So for example, through our Better Jobs Closer to Home project in Ebbw Vale, we have created from scratch a social enterprise, running it now with Elite, a great social enterprise. It also does paper recycling in Pentre Bach, fantastic organisation. We're now, all the scrubs we're using in the NHS in Wales are now made in Wales, and some of them by 15 long-term unemployed workers in Ebbw Vale. So what more can we do with that? We're going to need PPE for a long time to come. How much of that can we make in Wales rather than shipping it in? We're working on that. And then food, and particularly keen, we work with the local authorities to analyse the food production and how much more of that we can ensure to the area. Because we know the other thing we haven't talked about this morning, Hugh, Brexit. That's coming at us with ferocity. It's clear from yesterday the UK government are hell-bent on a no-deal Brexit, which they'll try and fold into the COVID crisis and blame it on that. But we have got headwinds coming at us from all ways. So the more we can do to make our local economies resilient through the community wealth building, a cooperative approach, the better. And then finally and lastly, Hugh, the work we're trying to do to support grounded firms. So how can we build up small firms and make them medium-sized firms? How do we then keep them in Wales, capture that wealth locally, stop them selling out, and doing some good work with the Wales Co-op Centre and others there to try and do that. The thing I've learned of just 18 months being in government, it's easier, it was that great Mario Cuomo line, isn't it, that you campaign in poetry and you govern in prose. Well, prose is bloody difficult, and it's easier to talk big, but I think it's the wins and the gains we can have through this crisis to pocket them and get things done and focus. The strategy is action. Not easy, but that's what we've got to focus on. Diolch Hugh.
Lee, thank you very much indeed. And as per normal, real focus on detail there as well, which is the way we move some of these things forward. Just for those who aren't aware, by the way, Lee, of course, is not only a cooperator himself, a member of the Co-operative Party, but he is our minister with responsibility for cooperative and driving that agenda across government. And if you look at the stock take of what Welsh Government has achieved, particularly in terms of the economy and the social economy over the last period, it has been significant, and having Lee in there as an access route into government has been a real help. Now we're going to move now on to our colleague Christina Rees. Christina, are you there?
Yes, Hugh, I'm here. I'd just like to start by saying I'd like to thank all of you for the amazing help and support that you gave to me in my former role as Shadow Secretary of State for Wales. As you know, I loved every minute, and it was an absolute honour to serve in the Shadow Cabinet, and I wish my successor, Neil Griffith, my great friend, all the best. As you know, this is our second Wales Cooperative Conference, and it was initially scheduled to take place in the Castle Hotel in Neath. So I'm pleased that we've decided to go ahead virtually, and the wonders of modern technology never cease to amaze me. And I hope that next year's conference will be in Nice. Just put an early plug in there. And I'd like to thank everyone who came to last year's conference in the Dragon Hotel in Swansea, and to Karen and her team. We had a great time. Thanks. So since I was elected in May 2015, I've known nothing but life in opposition. So I envy members of the Welsh Government. You can do things, and you're led by a fantastic First Minister, my friend Mark. And in Wales, you've done things properly. You've looked at the COVID-19 medical evidence. You've consulted a wide group of stakeholders. The Welsh Government Cabinet discuss, make a decision, and then you announce it to the public. That's a social partnership. And I don't think that the Prime Minister gets social solidarity. And the Welsh Government daily coronavirus updates are so informative. Mark and his ministers and Dr. Andrew Goodall actually answer the questions from the media, in contrast to the UK government daily press briefings. So in opposition, you have to be creative, and us cooperators are very creative. I'll give you just a flavour of what we've been up to in Parliament. We've ensured that retail workers have been added to the UK government COVID-19 list of key workers. And so they have the support they need to make sure that food supply chains operate, shop shelves are stocked, and essential stores are open when we go shopping, staying local in Wales, of course. It is very sad that the USDO coronavirus survey showed that violence and abuse towards shop workers has doubled during the lockdown. So I'm so pleased that Alex Norris, our cooperative MP, is bringing back his private members bill with massive support from USDO and all the other trade unions. That's going to return to the Commons, and its provisions provide greater protection for retail workers and greater sentences for abusers. And you've probably seen in the media that the UK government are looking at removing restrictions on Sunday trading hours, which we oppose. Their argument that this will boost the economy just doesn't add up. And extending the opening hours on a Sunday will put extra pressure on staff who are already working flat out. They've introduced really quickly safer working practices and social distancing in their stores, and coped with staff shortages due to shielding and self-isolating. We will campaign with USDO and other trade unions to make the case that this is unproductive, unnecessary, and would damage our dedicated shop workers. We've also called for the UK government to adopt a roadway to dignity in bereavement, which would set out short, medium and long-term support for those grieving after losing loved ones in this pandemic. And that includes asking the DWP to expand the criteria beyond those in receipt of prior welfare payments, or to consider creating a funeral crisis loan. And now that I'm on the backbenches again, I'd like to bring back my Mutual Guarantee Society bill through the private members bill process. I'll answer questions on that later if you like. And finally, as you know, we've just launched our Own in the Future report, and I'm sure you've all read it. It's a great report. So I'll just say that I'm looking forward to offering policy solutions to help rebuild the economy as we recover from the pandemic. The Populous poll, commissioned as part of the report, showed people want the economy to be shared more fairly. And 62% think it should be a priority post-COVID. 66% think that the economy would be fairer if we had more cooperatives and if employees and communities own businesses. And 64% think employees should be allowed to buy out businesses at risk of closure coming out of lockdown. So it's great to be here today, and thanks very much.
Christina, thank you very much indeed. And by the way, thanks for all the work that you did, policy and campaigning in your former role on the front bench. But can I just say, backbench is a good place to be as well. There's a hell of a lot that you can do from the backbenches, particularly this time in Westminster as well. So thank you very much for that contribution. Can I just remind everybody on the call here that you can still submit questions. So have a look at that chat box. Some people are making contributions in it just to a flow of conversation. But if you want to put a question in, can you pop it in there as well? And we'll try and get to it at the end of our 4 panelists' contribution. And that brings us now to somebody you'll all know, Alun Michael. Alun, over to you.
Hugh, diolch yn fawr iawn am y cyfle o bod yn rhan o'r sgwrs yma. I love Mark Drakeford's response to Mary on co-op politics. And I think it's worth celebrating the fact that he's lived the cooperative principle in the way that he's led through the COVID-19 crisis, as well as having the support of Vaughan and Lee and cooperators in government. We've got so much going for us in Wales, and I think Lee has illustrated that by what he said about the foundational economy. Now, policing is a non-devolved service, but we work in a devolved environment. And since I was elected, since I stepped down from Parliament to take up this office in 2012, I've sought to build cooperative alliances with Welsh Government, with local authorities across the area, with other criminal justice bodies, and with the other 3 police and crime commissioners and the chief constables. I have to say that became a lot easier from 2016 when Jeff Cuthbert, who I think is on the call, was elected as the Labour Cooperative Commissioner in Gwent, and we've worked very closely together and tried to provide cooperative leadership then. It also became easier when the Conservative Chris Salmon was defeated in Dinas Powys, I have to say. At the next election, we'll have 4 Labour and cooperative candidates in Wales. So we've made great strides. We're in a better place than in any region of England when COVID-19 struck. And I think it's worth reflecting on the COVID-19 experience in Wales as we've looked to work with the public to enforce regulations, which of course were set down in Wales by Welsh Government. And it has been a triumph for cooperation in the public sector. We had clarity from the First Minister and from Welsh Government. That made an incredible difference. As commissioners, we've had the time of ministers and officials in Welsh Government, so we get our messages across to the public jointly and with clarity. Thirdly, the style of policing in Wales is absolutely focused on the 2 Pelian principles. Firstly, that the first responsibility of the police is to prevent crime. So success is the absence of crime, not the presence of activity. And secondly, the police are the community and the community are the police. Now, underline that last point because that's what we saw as a benefit in the COVID-19 endemic. We had police officers applying the 4 E's, as they're called. In other words, explaining to the public, encouraging the public to stick to the regulations, supporting the health messages, and only using enforcement as a last resort. Not being afraid to use enforcement, but seeing it as the reserve. And officers and PCSOs who've really engaged with the public. And the response of the public in Wales has been far more positive. And again, that's a combination, I think, of that attitudinal approach and the clarity of the message. You could just look on the bank holiday weekend at the difference between a couple of beaches in the south of England and the beaches in Wales. And it was absolutely dramatic. In southern England, nobody taking a blind bit of notice of the regulations that were there for the protection of the public, protection of public safety and health. And in Wales, a reasonable response by people. And the amount of communication we've had with local government leaders, with assembly members, with MPs has been enormous. Now, I've focused just on that because that's where we are at the moment. We're doing many things differently in policing in Wales, particularly engaging in the public service boards through the Future Generations Act. And as I say, exercising our responsibilities within the devolved context. But I'll just mention one example to close. and that is the priority we've put on domestic violence and abuse. Very big worry that that would be the hidden harm during the COVID-19 period. And we concentrated on trying to get the messages across that it's still a priority during this period. And as far as I'm concerned, one of the things that we've done is to develop the DRIVE programme, which is tackling the perpetrators of domestic violence and abuse to try to reduce future harm. The success of that in the places where we ran a pilot, the money ran out in March, but we're going to continue this project in Cwm Taf and Cardiff, and we're going to roll it further to Bridgend and the Vale of Glamorgan during the summer, and to Neath Port Talbot and Swansea in the autumn, is making a difference in terms of the figures we're seeing in terms of domestic violence and abuse. So the point I would make in closing is that cooperative politics, as referred to by Mark, is about much more than cooperatives, and I'm glad that he made that clear. It's about values, it's about principles, it's about relationships, it's about working together. We're in a good position in Wales to increase the effectiveness of cooperative politics, working with a Welsh Government that understands those values and principles. Diolch yn fawr iawn, Hugh.
Diolch yn fawr I chi, Alun. Thank you very much indeed. Great contribution. And for a final contribution now from the panelists, before we go to questions, we will go now to Liz Burnett. Liz, great to have you with us. Over to you.
Thank you, Hugh, and I'm absolutely delighted to join you this morning. It's a very good time to be discussing how we want our country and our economy to look going forward. And never have cooperative principles been more relevant or possibly critical to our future. The only way we've got through this is by cooperation. It was good to hear Mark mentioning that. Welsh Government and local government have been working hand in hand throughout this. All local government, all leaders, deputy leaders have been involved in conversations daily on this. PPE supplies have been as a result of cooperation. We supply all our private care homes, all our private domiciliary care agencies, even people on direct payments. And that's the only way that we've managed to keep all that going. Schools have worked collaboratively with their communities. There's been boosts to food banks. Schools have supported local vulnerable children. And also the councillors worked collaboratively with health services to establish a crisis centre for our shielding and vulnerable people. What Mark also mentioned is the voluntary groups that have been formed specifically for as a response to the pandemic. And I'm actually working with one to establish a community cooperative at the moment. It's interesting to see their evolution and how they've realised the strength of cooperation and have also become aware of the unmet needs around them, forming their own cooperatives loosely at the moment, but hopefully more to meet those needs. I'm interested in the report, in the ideas of place-based economy. We can look to the example of city regions in Wales, where there's much more cooperative and shared priorities. And from ours in South Wales, 10 local authorities working together, who'd have thought? We've been doing some sense of place work to underpin economic development in Barry. Businesses are often solitary entities, independent and fiercely competitive. But through collaborative groups of traders, we're now developing plans for the relaxation of lockdown measures in our town centres, because we recognise that if people don't feel safe, they're going to go to the sanitised, controlled supermarkets. And we're working with them and working on town councils on plans that we can amend, pilot, develop, etc. in collaboration with them. We need to continue to develop social capital within our communities and businesses and foster cooperation. And I think here I'd name check the EU rural regen schemes that successfully drove forward the LEADER projects. And that's a brilliant example that we can take forward in developing our communities. And an example, if you want to look online, is a thing called the Cowbridge Collective, which is an online local food cooperative, which is working brilliantly. But we need to start by systematically taking private profit out of public services and ensure democratic decision making. That's not lobbying by single issue groups. I think most of us have dozens of formulaic letters arriving in our in trays every day. But this is really about hearing the voices of every sector of our community and every group of service users. And I think that's probably where I'll leave it, that is the huge challenge that we face coming out of this pandemic. Thank you.
Brilliant, thank you, Liz. Thank you to all our panelists there. Now, we're into the questions session, and we're going to take this up to 11:30. I'm going to do my best to close it at 11:30. So don't be shy now if you want to put a question in the chat box. But we've already got some lined up. And could I say to my panelists, some of the questions might seem obvious for one panelist to answer, but if you feel you want to add something to it from your perspective, or as a cooperative member who's on the panel, feel free to do so. So if we, just to forewarn the people who put the questions in, we're going to go to Alice first. Alice and Poppy have done a tremendous piece of work for us last year on issues around food, and they've got a question. Then we're going to go to Sky Oaks, I think it is, who has a question around the Development Bank, and then to Geraint Michael on the local electricity bill, I think it is, just been in front of Parliament. So Alice, first of all, we'll come to you.
Hi, thanks, Hugh. So this question is to anyone on the panel who feels able to answer it. And it's about the research that we did for the Wales Co-operative Party on cooperative ways of working in the food system. And what we found is that several cooperative models encourage this transition to a sustainable and just food system in Wales. So things like community-supported agriculture, cooperative models of distribution and infrastructure and tool sharing. And loads of these things have in fact happened since COVID. There's been a lot of cooperation within the food system, both at the community level, but then in terms of producers cooperating to distribute and set up local markets. So what we wanted to know is kind of what is the prospect of these things being supported and encouraged into the future, because the food system is really vital, just as the health system, as we've seen in this crisis.
Thanks very much, Alice, and I'm sure Lee and possibly Liz as well might have something to say on that, if not our other panelists. So if we can go to Sky Oaks, if you are there. Okay, we're drawing a blank screen at the moment. If not, I'll put Sky Oaks' question in a moment. But could we go to Geraint Michael, please?
Hello. Yes, it was lovely to hear Liz mention leader funding just then, because I've had the privilege I've been working on a leader funded project for the past year or so on local electricity. And I've become very aware what a huge opportunity there is in Wales, especially to create local electricity companies, but it's not legally possible. Certainly not if you can't fund the sort of £3 million or so to become a national electricity company. We are in the vanguard of this because there is a workaround that was created in Wales in the form of Energy Local, but the campaign led by an organisation called Power for the People to introduce a local electricity bill has had some progress in Parliament recently. So I wondered whether Christina might be able to give some kind of insight into what discussions there might be among Co-operative Party members, because it actually has been introduced via a Conservative MP, but you know, the campaign seems to have more contacts with Conservatives, so it's a great opportunity to sort of cooperate in an unusual way there.
That's brilliant. Thank you very much, Geraint, for that. And you've queued Christina up ready for that. Now we can't seem to get Sky Oaks up on the screen there. So if I can put Sky Oaks' question to the panel, and it's to do with the ethical policies of the Welsh Development Bank. What approach will it be taken to its ethics in terms of investment and development of the Welsh businesses and the economy? So let's throw this open. Let's start with Christina on the electricity one, and then perhaps we'll, and if you want to touch on anything else, Christina, that's been mentioned as well, it's fine. And then we'll work our way through the panelists.
Thank you, Hugh. Geraint, it's funny you should ask me about this, because I've had lots of queries about this week. It's Peter Aldous is taking it through, and it was a Jeremy Lafoy bill, and it fell last time. But I believe in working cross-party, especially on private members' bills. So I'm supporting it, and I've signed up to support it. I think it's got lots of really good clauses in it, and one of which is that the Welsh Government will be consulted before any regulations will be applied. So it's very devolution friendly. I've already found out that I think it's coming back in July. We have no sitting Fridays in June, so hopefully we'll come back in July. And I'll hopefully then be in the chamber, whether virtually or in person, to add my support to the bill. And I think it paves the way for everything that you said, Geraint, in creating local energy cooperatives. So I'm a massive supporter. And about the food, the first question from Alice and Poppy. I remember when I was a Bridgend councillor that we set up with European funding the Community Foodies project, which started in Evanstown with a piece of ground just in the middle of Evanstown Estate. And you probably remember this, Hugh, that we asked the community what they wanted to do with it. And they said that they wanted to grow their own food. So we set that up with funding, and it was so successful. People were desperate to get a plot in this land. And then we made it into a social enterprise because they grew so much. Then they took on selling the food. And that's a really good example of the council working with the community. It was expanded then. The Vale of Glamorgan then came in, and they had, we had joint use then. As Jill was saying, councils working together. So I'm very proud of what happened there. And I think that there's going to be more and more demand for this, because in this terrible pandemic that we find ourselves in, people are starting to grow their own food, whether it be in their gardens or whether they're desperate to get an allotment. And I think that in these times where we can pause and reflect and see how we get out of this crisis, then that would be a very, very important part.
That's brilliant. Christina, thank you very much indeed. Liz, should we come to you next? Any of those issues there, but you mentioned, of course, the Cowbridge Food Cooperative as well.
Yes, there's been some really interesting stuff going on. A couple of things to mention. I mean, the Cowbridge Collective is an online farmers market. And so between Thursday and the following Tuesday, you can go online, order specific items. Then at the moment, you drive into a car park in Cowbridge on a Thursday evening, and they load everything into your boot. And it's working really well. And a local low waste shop has linked in with them, so you can actually get all your pre-packaged flour and baking stuff and all sorts of things and pasta delivered at the same time. So that's a really good way of combating some of the online services that we're seeing with local supermarkets at the moment that tend to be sucking up all the trade. So that's actually working really well. But the other thing that might be interesting for people is that we've established thing called Big Fresh, which is a local authority trading company for our catering services, predominantly school meals, but catering services. And that's actually done in a cooperative model, so that schools are shareholders and various other people, and even our local Michelin star chef is actually on the board of the business. But that gives us the freedom to have local procurement policies. And that's what we do. So our local dairies provide milk. We're going out to local farmers, because quite often local farmers can't meet the huge procurement requirements of national contracts, but they could work with us on a local authority level, and that's given us the freedom to do that. So at the moment, that's working very well as well. And yes, the community foodies scheme is really good, and the ones in the Vale are still very active. Thanks, Christina.
Thank you very much. Lee, can we come to you, please?
Yes, so just on the food point, and I was one of the members of the Senedd who contributed to the funding of that project. I was very keen to see it take place and pleased to see the report and keen to keep in touch with it. We are doing some work. I had a meeting this week to see how the Valleys Task Force can take forward some of the community growing projects and how we can tie that into the work we're doing on the foundational economy. So had a very good meeting with a number of people this week about that. So keeping on top of it, but keen to reconnect with you, Alice, on it. And also, whether there's an opportunity, I mentioned the project that we're doing in Carmarthenshire to try and get local food on the local plates, and whether or not we can link local growing into that. Because one of the difficulties is just getting the scale required in order to meet large contracts, whether or not we can unbundle them to make it more doable. So it's definitely the agenda is alive, and keen to reconnect with the report authors on it.
That's brilliant. And Alan, we're not missing you out. Any thoughts on that first round of questions?
Can I just make one very general point? Across the front of my police and crime plan for South Wales is the slogan, "Everything is connected to everything else." And I just want to suggest that that's a central cooperative principle. So we operate in the context of the Future Generations Act. So yes, first responsibility is policing and the prevention of harm. But we have to look at how we work within the wider context. So when Lee launched the initiative in relation to the foundational economy, I was one of the first to support him in that. We need to look at where we buy our energy. And I just suggest that right across the public service, we need to look at how all we support each other in whether it's creating safe, confident communities or building an interconnected cooperative environment in Wales. I think we're doing pretty well at it. So the questions that we had were not directly to policing, but they're not irrelevant to policing either.
Brilliant, thank you all. Great first round of questions. It's going to get even more interesting now as we go into the second round. So just to again flag up our contributors who've put questions in, we're going to go in this order. Sarah Birch, Jill German, I think it is, or Garman, and then David Smith, who's got two questions. And David, I'll allow you to put both if you're quick there. So Sarah Birch, first of all, please.
Well, I think a lot of my questions may have been already been answered. Because
I think it's the one to do with community and worker buyouts, Sarah.
Right, yeah, there are many previously thriving businesses which may not survive the pandemic. So what's happening to ensure that worker and community buyouts are an option that's suggested by local authorities and business advisors? For instance, if a business owner is thinking that they really can't face rebuilding after all of this and may have already closed the business or is retiring and just can't see their way back.
Brilliant, thank you. And we've seen the previous reports from the Co-operative Party showing the massive impact that could happen if we could actually enable cooperative employee buyouts, and not least in the current situation with COVID as well. So that's a great Great question. Secondly, a really interesting question from Jill German or Garman, my apologies if I got that wrong, to do with Flying Start and cooperative within childcare provision and child development. Jill, over to you.
Hi, it's Jill German, thanks. Hi, my question is about Flying Start, as mentioned. I believe that Flying Start is a really powerful model for building communities together for young children and families. And up until the austerity years, it was a universal offer, which I actually took part in. Now it's back to working with deprived areas, which is obviously fabulous work. But I just wondered what part the cooperative movement could make in building up towards the universal offer again, because I believe that's where it's most powerful. Thank you.
Great question, thank you. And then to David, who's already asked a question, but he got a couple there on social care co-ops and education, which we've hardly touched on so far.
Thank you, Chair. When Mark responded to my earlier question, he spoke about the way in which in 2012 we brought people over from Emilia-Romagna and from Quebec just to say this is like normal. I mean, why isn't it happening in Wales? And from that, Cartrefi Cymru Cooperative, who still retained their charitable status, are a cooperative. And I think people like Adrian and so on are well known to Lee. And it seems so straightforward to grow the social care sector by focusing on versions where senior management team are really committed to economic democracy and share cooperative values. And that would seem to me to be a very easy win, where large NGOs are a receipt of public money and providing adult social care services. My second question related to education. And this is one of the interesting aspects that's omitted, unfortunately, from the excellent document that we're to discuss today. We can't build cooperatives unless we have cooperators. And it seemed to me that the challenge is so great that it can't be achieved by the cooperative movement alone. And that's where the national or the new national curriculum ought to kick in. And I've been having some very useful discussions with Qualifications Wales, representing WCVA, on a high-level design group looking at the specification for the advanced certification of Welsh BAC, which will come into operation in about 3 years' time. And what I think is really crucial, and I hope ministers can actually follow this up, is that we make sure that awarding bodies ensure that we do provide, and I'm now going to my question, do provide pupils and students with a solid understanding of new models of business, ownership, investment and purpose, and how this can reduce inequality and increase engagement and so on. So I think there are two very simple things that we can do there that don't need a lot of piloting. It's just very simple stuff and we just need to get on with it. Thank you, Chair.
Brilliant, thank you, David. Now, can we do this in a slightly different order with the panelists this time? Lee, if I come to you first, there, range of things there, but feel free to come back on any of those.
Okay, can you just remind me of Sarah's first point? Apologies.
Yes, so Sarah's was focusing on the issue of community and worker buyouts and the role of driving that within the cooperative economy.
Yeah, so I'm really keen on this. So I had a conversation in Llanelli just before COVID hit with a care home that's really been affected badly by COVID, as it turns out, where it's a wonderful care home, but it's existing because the owner isn't taking any money out of it. You know, he's doing it because he's a community-minded bloke, and Llanelli is Llanelli, but it's not sustainable. The guy's in his early 70s, and when he stops doing it, the business model doesn't stack up. And the conversation I had with him, not the easiest of conversations to have with people, was about succession planning. And had he considered employee ownership as a model for this care home? And he hadn't. And I just about started putting him in touch with people to start thinking about it when COVID hit. But it seems to me the social care sector in particular, we are very vulnerable. And it's a very brittle model, as we've much discussed, and there's huge potential, I think, for employee ownership. But I've been advised by Derek Walker and others that the process for getting to an employee-owned business takes around 10 years. And what we need to be doing now is identifying owner managers in their sort of 50s who we can start having that conversation to get them to that point when they retire. Our ability to do this rapidly in a crisis, I think, is quite constrained. But I'm absolutely open to seeing what can be done, because I think it is a key for retaining wealth, power and control in a community. And I have, as I mentioned in the chat, try to get the Business Wales advisors more alert to the opportunities for employee ownership in the conversations they have, and I'll follow that up as a result of this morning's conversation to see what the latest is with that. So thank you for that. That's a really good point. Second, similarly, Jill's point on Co-op Flying Start, I'm not. The honest answer is I don't know, but Jill, if you drop me an email, I'd be keen to look into it, because I think it's a really good point. I'll put my email in the chat bar, and then you can drop me a line. And similarly, Adrian, on education. My memory, Adrian, was when the Andrew Davies Co-op Commission reported and recommended co-op education as part of it. And hosting a conference on it, there was a degree of resistance of this being seen as a sort of an academy route that wasn't in the grain of the Welsh education movement at the time. One of the reasons why I commissioned from civil servants a refresh of Andrew Davies's report and how the progress we've reached on it, that Hugh mentioned at the very beginning, is to sort of see what we've done. And as Hugh said, we've done quite a lot on Andrew's recommendations, but there's bits that have got stuck in the mud, and I think the education one is one of those that's got stuck in the mud. So that refresh is available. It is publicly available. Maybe Karen can circulate it or put it online for us to see where we've got, and just have a brutal warts and all conversation of where we still need more progress, so we can refocus our energies on that. And I think education is one of those areas, David, that there's more to do.
Thanks, Lee. Thank you very much. Liz, I'm going to bring you in a moment, but not quite yet. Be really interested in your take on anything, but particularly the issues around Flying Start and young children's childcare, early years development and so on, and cooperatives within that. But first of all, can we go to Christina, because you wanted to respond to, in particular, to one of the points, Christina.
Yeah, I want to come in on Sarah's question, because it's quite pertinent to the bill that I'm going to try and take through. It's a mutual guarantee societies bill, and the UK is the only, I think, country in the world that doesn't do this. And it allows SMEs and cooperatives and mutual societies to combine together with their capital, and then they apply for a loan guarantee in the form of co-op and mutual shares. So each member has equal voting rights and participates in electing the General Assembly and the Board of Directors of the Mutual Guarantee Society. And then they then apply for a loan from the bank with that collateral behind them. So for the bank, the risk is lower because they've got collateral. So the price of money is cheaper. And then what happens then is that the Mutual Guarantee Society has got access to finance. It achieves a better credit condition, and it's a sort of bridge between SMEs and co-ops and banks, and they get better advice and supervision of financial plans. And I'm very keen to resurrect that and take it through again. So if you want any information, please email me and I'll send it out to you. Thank you.
Brilliant. Thanks, Christina. Liz, over to you.
Thanks, Hugh. I think, to be honest, I mean, I'm totally supportive of Flying Start, and the ones that we've got in the Vale are hugely successful. I would support a universal offer, but that's not my area of expertise. What I'm particularly interested in are two. One is the whole area. I mean, social care co-ops are a passion for mine. I think we all can see roads in our communities which fill up twice a day with carers' cars, which then drop in and then go away and then come back a few hours later, and there must be a better model than that for supporting older and vulnerable people in our communities. But I would like to talk a little bit more about co-op education. I contributed some research to the Co-op Commission, but in a past life I was head of social entrepreneurship at University of South Wales, and there came a time when anything other than mainstream entrepreneurship models were just not supported, and it was a huge shame, because there was a passion for it amongst students, and that's students in school as well as students in university. And I really do think that something needs to happen on that, because exactly as David says, this starts at grassroots level, and we did some really interesting stuff, but there was not the funding available to actually establish programmes in Wales on that model. And at the moment, I think we're importing stuff from Scotland, and it is a real shame that there should be homegrown cooperative, or there should be social entrepreneurship and cooperative education in Wales, plain as.
Thank you, Liz. Now, on this round, sorry, Alan, on this round, and you're going to have the final word on anything you want to do, and then I'll go to some closing remarks, because I've been a bad chair. We're going to run over by a couple of minutes. But Alan, over to you.
I'd just like to build on Liz's point there, because it does depend on the infrastructure and the support, and that relates to Jill's question on flying start and the importance of sure start. I really quite worry about, as we come out of COVID-19, about the viability of the community sector and those local initiatives. And the relevance to my role is really rooted in the Public Health Wales research on adverse childhood experiences, and those findings where that children who've had 4 or more adverse childhood experiences have a 65% greater chance of ending up in prison, a 60% greater likelihood of violence, being violent, and a 57% chance, greater chance of becoming a victim of violence. So if you look across the 10 harms that came out of that research, they're all relevant to the demand on the NHS and demand on the police. So we all pay a price if we don't give every child a good start and do things early in life to create the best possible chance of people being able to recover from bad experiences. So whereas giving every child a good start sounds a nice, attractive idea, it's actually absolutely essential to the decent joined up society that we all want to see.
Alan, thank you very much. And in respect of the question on Flying Start and universality of childcare and early years development provision as well, we'll make sure ourselves, Lee, other Senedd, members of the Senedd who are on this conference call today as well, that we feed that into ministers for them to consider as well. Now, we are a few minutes over, so can I wrap this up from today simply by saying, first of all, our thanks to First Minister Mark Drakeford for joining us right at the beginning and giving us such an excellent overview, not only in terms of response to the pandemic and the collective approach to that, and all pulling together, but also looking forward at what the recovery might look like and how cooperative principles will form a part of that. Can I also thank our panelists as well? They've been really excellent, great depth of expertise, different areas of knowledge and understanding, but all really committed cooperators as well. Thank you so much for your time and for answering questions. We never know what's going to come up on these, and you've been great in responding to the questions that have been put there. We've tried to get through most of the questions. For those that haven't, they've been in the chat board. We've taken note of them. We'll make sure that those are factored in as well going forward in policy development. And that's the final thing I want to mention, because we've had one additional question towards the end about how you all, as we all as cooperative members, can help draft our manifesto, and by the way also feed into Welsh Labour manifesto and UK Labour manifesto as well. Well, from a Wales Co-operative Party perspective, the manifesto process will shortly be launched online for contributions from members. We've got 2 more meetings coming up to discuss it as well, with Vaughan Gethin and Jeremy Miles, and of course we're happy to convene more local Zoom calls too. So look to your local and regional branches as well for what you can do to feed in to this process. So in saying all of that, can I genuinely thank all of you for joining us today. It's been a proper discussion and proper engagement, very open and transparent as we are within the Cooperative Party, and I think we wish all of our panelists very, very well in thanking them for contribution. Alun, we wish you well as well. Next year, all things being equal, in the rearranged PCC elections, and all our colleagues who are standing as well. And Lee, take back from us to your ministers. Christina, take back from us to your parliamentary colleagues, and Liz, to you in local government, our best wishes for all that you're doing at the moment, and keep the Cooperative Party flag and the cooperative ideals flying. Thank you very much. Oh, and finally, thank you to our very small team who behind the scenes have been making this happen. Not least Izzy and Karen and a couple of colleagues. There aren't many of them, but they are very dynamic, very hardworking, and we really appreciate your efforts. Take care and keep well, everybody, and look forward to seeing you soon. Goodbye now.
Diolch yn fawr, Hugh.